Your query letter is your book's first and perhaps only shot at grabbing a literary agent's attention, so you have to get it right. But it can feel impossible to know what agents are actually looking for in a query letter, and the fear that you'll say the wrong thing and then get instantly rejected is real. That's why I designed this course to give you all the insider industry knowledge you need to know to craft the perfect query letter in just 40 minutes. My name's Alyssa, and I'm a developmental book editor who previously worked at one of the industry's top literary agencies and at an imprint of Penguin Random House. Now I work with authors directly to help them strengthen their manuscripts and get book deals with major publishers. I've edited query letters for authors who have signed with agents at places like Janklow and Nesbitt, The Book Group, Distill Goderich and Bouret, Sandra Dykstra Literary Agency, Levine Greenberg Roston, and more, and who have gone on to publish books with imprints of Penguin Random House, HarperCollins, and Sourcebooks. I'm going to give you the foolproof query letter formula that worked for those authors right here, right now. I'll walk you through the 7 essential components of a strong query letter, including the most common mistakes authors make and all the nitty-gritty details you don't want to overlook. Then comes the fun stuff. I'll analyze 3 bad query letter examples that demonstrate some of the most common errors authors make that lead them to get instantly rejected. Then I'll show you a revised version of a strong query letter that hits all the marks for you to model yours after. Make sure to grab the query letter template linked in the description below so you can follow along when we get there. Now, are you ready to write the query letter that gets you an agent? Let's get started. Purpose of the query letter. It's not a perfect comparison, but think of the query letter like the cover letter that you submit with a job application. From the author's perspective, the purpose of the query letter is simple. You want to entice the agent to read your sample pages and then go on to request to read your full manuscript, which is the first step that they will take if they are interested in potentially offering you representation. The query letter is typically the first thing an agent looks at, even before they look at your sample pages, so it's also the place for them to get a first impression of you and your book. Use it to showcase what makes your story so special and make the agent eager to dive into your sample pages. From the agent's perspective, the query letter gives them some essential information to determine if they could be a good fit to represent you to publishers. For example, they will want to know if you are writing within a genre that they currently represent, and they'll want to be intrigued by your description of the story. If your query letter is improperly formatted, poorly written, or missing key information, it's likely the agent is going to reject your query letter before even diving into your sample pages. So even if your book is the best thing ever written, you might be shooting yourself in the foot by putting it behind an unpolished query letter. We want to avoid that at all costs, of course. So that's why it's important to take time up front to craft a query letter that is thoughtful and that follows industry standards. That brings me to the meat and potatoes of this lesson, the 7 essential components of a strong query letter. Let's walk through exactly what to include in your query letter from top to bottom. Here's a roadmap of the 7 sections your query letter should include: the greeting, the personalization, which is optional, the snapshot, the description, the comparable titles, the author bio, and finally the sign-off. Now let's walk through each section one by one. Number 1, the greeting. You'll begin the query letter like you would any professional correspondence with a salutation. Simply saying, "Dear agent's first name," is standard, and it's also perfectly acceptable to use their first and last name. If you want to use titles like Mr., Mrs., or Miss, then I recommend checking their preferred pronouns on their social media or on their website. But keep in mind that for querying purposes, agents will be totally comfortable being addressed by their first name or their first and last name. Do not use a general greeting like "Dear Agent." Remember that you are going to be submitting your queries digitally, so there's no need to include any formal header info with your address or the agency's address at the top. Number 2, personalization. Should you personalize your query letter to each individual agent? This refers to a line indicating why you are querying this particular agent. And query letter personalization is somewhat of a debated topic in the publishing industry. The argument for personalizing each query letter is that it can help your queries stand out and make the agent feel more compelled to give your query a shot if you indicate upfront why you think you will be a good fit for their list specifically. It also shows the agent that you've done your research, which is a good thing. And it could make them more excited about a potential professional partnership. The argument against personalization is that it can take a significant amount of time on the author's end, especially when you are typically querying dozens of agents. And for some agents, a personalization line doesn't necessarily impact how they review the query. In fact, some agents specifically say in their query guidelines that they do not care if you personalize the query letter or not. If you do choose to personalize, keep it short and sweet. There's no need for longer than 1 or 2 sentences max. There are 4 effective ways to personalize your query letter, and I will walk through them one by one in order from what I see as most effective to least effective. First is mentioning any personal connection you have to that agent. If you have met this agent at a conference or other writing event, or if they gave you any personalized feedback on any previous queries that you have sent to them, maybe for another book project, then definitely mention that at the top of your query letter to jog their memory of your last correspondence. This will likely catch the agent's attention and make them consider your query more seriously. The second way to personalize is by mentioning a specific author or book that agent has represented. This shows the agent that you have done your research and understand the types of books that they are interested in. You have a sense of their taste. And it could help demonstrate how your book suits their list. Mentioning something specific that they say they are seeking in their profile or manuscript wish list. Many agents will post the types of books that they would like to see submitted to them. You will often hear them use the term manuscript wish list to refer to the types of projects they would like to see from prospective clients. For instance, they might say they are looking for rom-coms set in New England. This is much more specific than just saying they are open to queries in the romance genre. So if your book matches some specific element they are calling out in their manuscript wish list, that could be a good way to personalize. Finally, you can personalize by mentioning an article or podcast or interview that you saw the agent featured in. Many agents have an online presence of some kind, which can help you get to know their tastes a bit more and understand their personality and background. If you find an agent through some kind of online media, you can mention that in your query letter, though I don't think it is the strongest way to personalize. Now remember that having a personalization line is not required. So if it doesn't feel natural for you to include one in a query letter, then don't stress too much about it. You can also personalize some queries and leave others unpersonalized. Number 3, the snapshot. The next section of the query letter is what I call the snapshot, and it is where you will describe the essential information about your book. The 3 key details that the agent will be looking for are the title, the genre, including the age category, and the word count. Of these 3 details, the genre and the word count are more important than the title. In the publishing industry, titles often change throughout the publishing process. You will want to have a title that you feel good about, but don't stress too much over it because ultimately, the title is not likely to be a deal breaker for the agent if they love your book. Now, the genre, on the other hand, is very important because agents will use your genre to determine which editors at publishing houses they could submit your book to. The big 5 publishing houses in the US are made up of hundreds of different imprints, each of which specializes in a different set of genres. In Query Tracker, the available adult fiction genres are action/adventure, book club, chick lit, commercial, contemporary, crime/police, erotica, family saga, fantasy, general fiction, gothic, graphic novel, historical, horror, humor/satire, LGBTQ+, literary fiction, military/espionage, multicultural, mystery, offbeat/quirky, poetry, religious/inspirational, romance, science fiction, short story collection, speculative, thrillers/suspense, upmarket, western, and women's fiction. Some of these genre terms are not widely used in the publishing industry today, including chick lit, gothic, and offbeat/quirky, but these genre categories do give you a starting point. I wouldn't recommend using any genre terms in your query letter that don't appear on this list, because that probably means that it isn't widely used across the industry. Now, your book very well may match more than one of these categories. There is some overlap, for instance, between book club, upmarket, and women's fiction. And general fiction is a vague term that would likely include commercial, upmarket, and literary fiction. Or perhaps you have a historical mystery that falls into both the historical and mystery genres. In the case that you have multiple genre terms you could use, I recommend choosing one that most encompasses or reflects your book, or if it is a specific blend of genres that is commonly seen in the industry, like historical mystery, that is also perfectly fine to use as your category/genre term in the query letter. Some genres also have a whole list of subgenres. including, for instance, the many different varieties of fantasy. If your subgenre is widely known in the industry, like epic, high, or urban fantasy, then that term is also perfectly fine to use in your query letter. Agents will also need to know whether your book is intended for an adult, young adult, middle grade, or children's audience. Some agents only work within some age categories, while others will work across multiple age categories. Some genre terms like literary or upmarket fiction are only used to describe adult novels, while others could refer to novels across different age categories like mysteries or romances. So in the latter case, make sure that you specify which age category your book is for. Now let's talk about word count. You can round your word count to the nearest 1,000 word. For instance, if it is 84,434 words, you could just round to 84,000 words for the purposes of the query letter. Always include an accurate word count in your query letter, even if it is above or below industry standards for your genre and age category. Because remember that agents are going to see your word count whenever they request the full manuscript, which is the next step in potentially offering you representation. Plus, word count is something that most agents want to know right off the bat, because it gives them a sense of if the manuscript is currently falling within industry expectations and therefore is something feasible that they could sell to a publishing house. If you are querying a book that falls widely outside of the industry norms for your genre and age category, it is not impossible to find a literary agent and a publisher, though you might have a more difficult time. In that case, your agent might work with you to get your manuscript to the more accepted range in terms of word count, but it is typically best to do that work upfront on your own prior to querying to give yourself the best shot. Now, once you've collected all your necessary details, your word count, genre, and title, all you need to do is string them together in a single sentence for that snapshot line in your query letter. The standard language would be, I'm seeking representation for title, comma, an age category, genre, novel, complete at number words. That said, many authors forego the first part of that sentence about seeking representation, since it's implied that you're seeking representation if you are querying an agent after all, and simply say, title is an age category, genre, novel, complete at number words. If you choose to include a personalization line, the snapshot line can come in the same paragraph as that one, directly after it, typically. If you don't have a personalization line, the snapshot should either be the first line of your query letter or come directly after your description section. Next up is the description. This is the most important section of your query letter because it's where you're going to give the agent a taste of your story and make them want to read your sample pages. It should be written in third person and include all of the foundational aspects of the story, including the setting, the protagonist's name and age, the setup, what is the protagonist dealing with at the start of the novel, the inciting incident, what happens to the protagonist to kickstart the events of the plot? The objective. What is your protagonist seeking to achieve over the course of the story? And the main conflict. What obstacles does your main character face in their attempt to achieve their objective? What crossroads or difficult decision do they face? Think of the description as the movie trailer for your book. You don't want to give everything away, of course, but you should describe it in enough detail to pique the agent's interest. You should end the description with a cliffhanger of sorts that leaves the agent wondering how the story pans out. The description should fall somewhere between 150 to 300 words and span about 2 to 4 paragraphs. You don't want it to be too short and overly general or vague, but at the same time, you don't want it to be too long and include too many plot details that become cumbersome to read. Do not give away the ending or any major spoilers, especially if you are writing a suspense novel. As a general rule of thumb, the description really only needs to cover about the first quarter of your story. A template I like to use is the following. Paragraph 1. Introduce the protagonist, the setting, and the setup. Where does the story start? What is the protagonist's situation? Paragraph 2. Describe the inciting incident. What happens to jumpstart the protagonist's journey? How does their life change? And what objective do they set as a result? Paragraph 3. Describe the ensuing conflict they face. Make sure we understand what is at stake for your protagonist in achieving their goal. What do they stand to gain from achieving that goal? And what do they stand to lose if they fail to achieve it? End the description with an intriguing line that teases the main source of intrigue or mystery that the story explores. More or less, the description should sound like the copy that goes on the back jacket of a hardcover novel or on the online description page. So look at other books in your genre, maybe by authors that you admire, and model your description after the descriptions of their novels. You will want to avoid any prefatory language like, my book follows a character named, and instead dive straight into describing the character and plot action. Ideally, your description would also be written in the same tone as your novel. So if it's a lighthearted rom-com, feel free to include puns or humorous language. If it's a thriller, the language can sound more ominous and intense. 5. Comparable titles. Many querying authors dread coming up with comparable titles, also known as comps for short. These are books that are similar to yours, typically within your genre, and the purpose of comps is to give agents a sense of what types of audiences will gravitate toward your book. In other words, what reader is going to pick this up and buy it? If you are able to demonstrate to them that other similar novels have been sold successfully and garnered strong sales, then the agent will feel more confident in their ability to sell your book to a publisher. Including comps also helps show the agent that you have a sense of the current publishing landscape. Comparable titles don't only come into play at the querying phase. If an editor at a publishing house is interested in buying the rights to your book, they will put together a profit and loss statement, which will include sales figures for other comparable titles in your genre. This profit and loss statement helps the publisher determine how much they expect to make on your book and therefore what they feel they can offer you as an author as the advance. If you don't already read widely within your genre, then you will want to do some research to come up with suitable comparable titles. Even better, check out a few books that were recently published in your genre from your local library and read them. This will not only help you come up with other possible comparable titles, but reading is one of the strongest ways to enhance your own storytelling. For the query letter, I recommend including 2 or 3 comp titles. Having one comparable title might not be enough for the agent to visualize the type of audience that you are intending to write for. And having more than 3 can confuse the agent as to which audience you are targeting exactly and where your book fits in the market. There are several guidelines for choosing strong comparable titles to keep in mind. First, the general rule of thumb is to include comparable titles that were published no more than 5 years ago, because you want them to reflect the current publishing landscape. Books that are older than that won't necessarily reflect current reader appetites. You should also typically stick to comps that were traditionally published, since that is the publishing path that you are seeking by reaching out to literary agents. And those are the types of publishers that your agent would look at placing your book with. That said, if there is a great comp that was self-published and sold extremely well, you can use it, but I recommend pairing it with at least one traditionally published comp as well. Comps should also be within your same genre and age category. The one exception is that you can use recent TV shows or films as comps, especially if they share a similar story premise or tone or theme. But in those cases, I recommend pairing the TV show or movie with at least one novel comp within your genre as well. Avoid any comparable titles that have low sales figures, which you can typically glean from seeing the number of Amazon or Goodreads reviews, or those that are outlier bestseller hits like The Hunger Games or Gone Girl. When presenting comps in your query letter, I recommend specifying what about each comp aligns with your novel, rather than just listing them generally. This should only take up 1 to 2 sentences max. Some authors like to put the comps right at the top of the query letter after the snapshot line, but I only recommend doing this if you feel really strongly about your comps or they are particularly eye-catching. Otherwise, comps can go after the description. Number 6, author bio. Fiction authors should include any relevant writing credentials, previous publications, or education in their author bio section. This could include any writing awards, any creative writing programs you were a part of, any short fiction or poetry that you've published, or any well-known writing workshops or retreats that you've attended. None of these qualifications are a requirement to getting a literary agent, but they're definitely worth mentioning if you have any of them. Also, if you have previously published a book with a traditional publisher, no matter how far in the past, you should mention that in your author bio section. If you have been previously represented by a literary agent, you might also choose to mention that in your author bio section, whether or not that went on to lead to a book deal. Regardless, you will discuss any of your prior publications or your prior representation with an interested literary agent, so they have the full picture of your writing career up to this point. If you've previously self-published a book, It's up to you whether you want to include that in your query letter or not. Some agents will ask for this information, in which case you would definitely want to include it. If you can cite any positive reviews or industry awards or sales figures, that's a plus. Again, you would discuss your publication history with any interested agent before going on to sign an offer of representation. In your author bio, I also recommend including where you currently live, as well as what you do for work outside of writing, if anything, just to give the agent a better sense of how writing fits into your life. And for professional purposes, they will eventually need to know where you are based. Your bio might come out to be anywhere between 1 to 5 sentences. And remember that agents will not automatically reject your query if you don't have a laundry list of writing credentials or education. And they do not expect a debut fiction author to have a ton of writing credentials. Number 7, the sign-off. Your sign-off should be short and straightforward. You don't need to include any niceties other than thank you for your consideration. Sign off with standard language like sincerely or best and include your full name. You don't typically need to include your email address or website or social media handles underneath your signature because the agent is going to contact you directly via the email that you use to query them. If you're submitting your query via an agent's form, they may have specific fields for you to include these links. Query letter variations. Generally, there are very few modifications to these 7 essential components of a strong query letter. And following this format is going to cover the vast majority of cases. That said, if an agent's query instructions specify that you include some information that doesn't fall into one of these sections, definitely go ahead and include it for that agent. You always want to default to their query instructions. Remember that it's best to stick to this tried and true formula rather than trying to be creative and eye-catching in your query letter. This can have the opposite effect and actually turn the agent off and make it more difficult for them to find the information they need to consider your query letter thoughtfully. The only 2 sections that you would potentially move around from the format that I just went through would be the snapshot and the comparable titles. Some authors prefer to put the snapshot line after the description, particularly if they don't have a personalization section, in which case the first line of the body of the query letter right after the greeting dives straight into the description. Alternatively, some authors like to put the comparable titles up at the top along with their snapshot line if they feel especially strongly about their comps or it is part of the general premise of the book. Tone. Remember when I said at the beginning of this lesson that writing a query letter is somewhat akin to writing a cover letter for a job application? One similarity is that you should include a professional tone in both. Query letters that sound overly casual, that disclose unnecessary personal information, that badmouth the publishing industry, or that are self-deprecating could rub agents the wrong way. At the same time, the query letter is not the place for a high-flying sales pitch. Don't oversell yourself by saying that you promise you will sell 1 million copies of your book, or kiss up to the agent by talking at length about how honored you would be to work with them. Be authentic, realistic, and humble. Just be yourself. Length. In total, your query letter should come out between 200 to 400 words max. That length might flex a little bit depending on whether you personalize or not and how lengthy your author bio is. In general, it's always best to err on the shorter side. Remember that most literary agents have hundreds of unread queries in their inboxes at any given moment. And they try to get through as many as they can as quickly as they can. So the more easily skimmable it is, the better. Agents are likely only going to spend a few minutes reviewing your query letter anyway. So if yours is overly long, they probably aren't going to read the entire thing. Now that you know the 7 essential components of a strong query letter, let's go through 3 examples of hypothetical ineffective query letters that reflect some of the most common mistakes authors make. At the end, I'll show you a revised version for the same hypothetical book that is a much stronger query letter. Bad query letter, example 1. Dear agent's first name, I am seeking representation for my novel, All Downhill, which has elements of suspense, mystery, horror, romance, and even a little humor. The book follows Abby, who is 27 years old and on her honeymoon with her new husband, Matt, at a luxurious ski resort in the Swiss Alps. They're having the trip of a lifetime until they discover that something sinister is happening on the slopes. 3 skiers have been found dead. As the body count rises, Abby will have to find a way to escape before her dream trip becomes her worst nightmare. This book is a must-read for anyone who loves pulse-pounding thrillers with shocking twists and wants to be kept on the edge of their seats. This is my debut novel. Thank you for your consideration. Sincerely, name. Let's break down all of the problems with this query letter. First, it doesn't have a personalization line, which is okay, but the snapshot line doesn't specify a specific genre, and instead mentions 5 distinct genres. That doesn't give the agent a good sense of where this book could be placed on the shelf. Even if the book encompasses elements of multiple different genres, you should still choose the most prominent genre to classify your book under. This author should also mention the age category that they intend to be writing for. In this case, the ideal genre classification would be adult thriller. The word count is also missing from the query letter as well. Then the description does tell us the protagonist's age and name, but it is only 3 sentences long and otherwise extremely vague. It doesn't give the agent enough insight into what actually happens in the plot. It begins with the prefatory language, "The book follows Abby," rather than describing the starting point of Abby's journey. We get no insight into the circumstances of the death or the specific obstacles that Abby faces in trying to escape the resort. There are no comparable titles, and instead the author makes some general editorial commentary after the description section, which isn't likely going to be particularly persuasive to the agent. While it's totally fine to mention in your author bio that this is your debut novel, this author doesn't include any other details about them. Ideally, this author bio would include a bit more about the author's work and any other writing experience and their location. This query letter comes out to just 137 words, which demonstrates that there is a lot more the author could do to bolster the query letter and provide more essential information to the literary agent. Let's look at another example. Bad query letter example 2. Dear agent's first name. I enjoyed your client's book title, and I'm excited to share All Downhill, my 80,000 word adult thriller perfect for readers who loved the exploration of marriage in Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl and the ominous atmosphere of Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. 27-year-old Abby Coulter arrives at the luxurious Grand Alpenglow resort nestled in the Swiss Alps with her husband Matt for their honeymoon. The first day of their stay is wonderful. The conditions are perfect, and they enjoy 3 hours of prime skiing, followed by a lively après-ski where they meet tech billionaire Rich Sterling and his French wife Lisette, who are attending his company's annual retreat. The couples party at the resort late into the night. The next morning, Abby and Matt wake to sirens. Looking out their hotel room window, they see paramedics crowding around the base of the main lift with a stretcher. The resort concierge informs them that a snow groomer found a body as they were preparing the runs for opening. Abby wants to leave the resort immediately, but Matt reassures her that death was likely an accident and it shouldn't derail their plans. At brunch, Rich explains a skier died in similar circumstances at a nearby resort last year, and that a few accidental deaths occur each season. Abby feels reassured until that evening, upon arriving for their dinner reservation, they discover the restaurant is closed due to police activity. Another guest has died. Abby again begs Matt to leave, but the next day, a blizzard closes all the roads and ski runs, so Abby, Matt, and Rich pass the day drinking in the resort bar while Lisette goes to the spa. Axe confides that his company is on the verge of going bankrupt, and he fears Lisette may leave him. He also mentions both of the people who died were employees of his company. The following morning, Rich calls Abby in Matt's room in a panic. His lead investor was found dead in his room, and Lisette is nowhere to be found. Abby digs into Lisette's social media and through an old photo posted 10 years ago, discovers she's not French at all, but an American woman named Sarah, who was an intern at Rich's company. Abby finds Lisette as she's attempting to leave the resort in a limo and confronts her about her identity. Lisette admits to murdering the company employees as revenge for what they did to her when she was an intern all those years ago, forced her to work excessive hours, during which she missed saying goodbye to her dying mother for a job offer that never came. Lisette asks Abby for help in taking out her last target, Rich. My inspiration for writing All Downhill came from my own experiences as an avid skier and my fascination with the psychology of killers, which led me to create a story that combines my love for skiing with a thrilling murder mystery. While this is my first novel, I have been passionate about writing since I was a child and have participated in several writing workshops. I live near Denver and work as a pediatric nurse. Given your extensive expertise in the thriller genre, as evidenced by the numerous best-selling authors on your client list, I would be honored to work with you to make my dreams of publishing All Downhill with the top publishing house a reality. Thank you for considering my query. Sincerely, Name. Whereas the last query letter was too vague and too short, this query letter is too long and too overly detailed. Let's start with the opening paragraph. The personalization looks fine, since this author is planning to mention a specific title that the agent previously represented, which is a good strategy. The genre, adult thriller, looks good as well. The word count is standard for the genre and included at the top in a rounded form as well. Now the first issue. The comparable titles, Gone Girl and Then There Are None, are not ideal. First off, they're both too old. Gone Girl was published in 2012 and Then There Were None was published in 1939. Remember that comps should have been published within the past 5 years so that they reflect the current publishing marketplace. Second, they're both considered outlier bestsellers, which are not your best choices for comps. It isn't the most realistic to compare your novel to canonical works or huge bestsellers, which is the case of both of these titles. Now let's look at the description. It's 4 paragraphs and giving us a lot of detail about the plot. It sounds more like a scene-by-scene summary because it is plainly relaying the events of the story without much stylistic language. Remember that you want your description to be written in enticing language that teases the story without giving too much away. In this case, the description gives away the twist that Lisette is lying about her identity and gives away the reveal that she's the killer, which feels like major spoilers. The agent will want the opportunity to experience the twists and reveals for themselves, so don't give it all away. If they request a separate synopsis document, that would be the place to plainly relay exactly how the plot unfolds beat by beat. The author then details their inspirations for writing the novel, which isn't necessary to include because it will impact how the agent reviews the work. In the bio paragraph, the author mentions participating in several writing workshops. They might specify which ones because you never know if an agent has a connection to those or knows of them. They do include their location and what they do for work, which is good. The paragraph before the sign-off isn't necessary. Because you are querying the agent, it goes without saying that you would like to work with them. And don't feel the need to be overly complimentary of the agent in your query letter because ultimately you want to keep it concise. All in all, this query letter comes out to 582 words, so it needs to be condensed. Let's look at one more example. Bad query letter example 3. Dear agent's first name. A woman's dream honeymoon turns into her worst nightmare when a serial killer targets a luxury ski resort. After spending a fabulous first day on the slopes, 27-year-old newlywed Abby Coulter sips a dirty martini fireside at the luxurious Grand Alpenglow resort nestled in the Swiss Alps. She and her husband, Matt, meet charismatic tech billionaire Rich Sterling and his French wife, Lisette, at the resort's après-ski party. Abby finds herself jealous of the couple's playful chemistry, something she's always longed for with the serious Matt. Their plans to hit the slopes together the next morning come to a crashing halt when they hear sirens and see paramedics crowding around the main lift. Someone's been found dead on the run, and the circumstances look suspicious. Abby is ready to head home, but Matt and Rich reassure her that accidents happen every year, that skiing is an inherently dangerous sport. But when 2 more victims are found and a blizzard shuts down all roads leading out of the resort, Abby realizes a ruthless killer is lurking somewhere in the Grand Alpenglow. She has to find a way out ASAP. Her marriage and her life depend on it. All Downhill, my 80,000-word adult psychological thriller, will appeal to readers who loved the locked room mystery style of Glass Onion and the twists of All Your Twisted Secrets by Diana Urban. I've taken 2 fiction intensives through Gotham Writers Workshop where I refined this novel. Previous readers have praised its edge-of-your-seat suspense and immersive setting. An avid skier, I live in Denver and work as a pediatric nurse. In addition to this novel, I have 3 other complete manuscripts, 2 psychological thrillers, and a rom-com. Thank you for your time and consideration. Sincerely, Nate. This query letter is certainly stronger than the other 2 examples we went through, but it could be refined and polished even further. First, it begins with a 1-line elevator pitch, which isn't necessary in most cases. Some agents will ask for a 1-line pitch as part of their query form, but you don't need to include it in the query letter. This description is heading in the right direction and doesn't give too much away, which is great. But the author could take one more beat to describe Abby's starting point at the beginning of the story to help us connect to her. And the author could be more specific in noting what Abby uncovers about the killer and how it relates to her marital struggle. This would make the plot sound even more enticing and relate her internal struggle to the main conflict more clearly. This author chose to forego the personalization line and instead put both the snapshot and the comps after the description, which is perfectly fine. But let's take a closer look at the comps they selected. The first is Glass Onion, which is a 2022 film. Given that it's a recent film and also falls in the mystery suspense category, this is an acceptable comp. But it should be paired with a novel comp that is in the same genre that this author is writing in. All Your Twisted Secrets by Diana Urban was recently published, but it is a YA thriller. Make sure your comps match your age category as well as your genre. In this case, the author should use an adult thriller comp. In the comps section, the author mentions taking 2 fiction intensives, which is great information, but it should be moved to the author bio section. They also included quotes from their previous readers, which I recommend removing since they aren't likely going to be particularly persuasive to an agent. And there's no context for who these readers were. In the author bio, the author mentions the other manuscripts that they have in the works, which isn't typically necessary to include. You would discuss your plans for future books or other works in progress with any agent who's interested in representing you on your follow-up phone call. Okay, now that we've learned all the mistakes from the previous query letters, let's look at a good query letter example. Dear agent's first name, I enjoyed your client's book title and am excited to share All Downhill, my 80,000-word adult psychological thriller. At the luxurious Grand Alpenglow Resort nestled in the Swiss Alps, the party begins once the ski lifts close. The fireplace is roaring, snow is falling, and drinks are flowing. It should be heaven on earth for 27-year-old newlywed Abby Coulter, except something has felt off between her and Matt ever since their wedding 5 days ago. Hoping to ease the tension and start their honeymoon on the right foot, she brings him to the resort's après ski party, where they meet charismatic tech billionaire Rich Sterling and his French wife Lisette. As they dance and swap skiing stories, Abby finds herself jealous of the couple's playful chemistry, something she's always longed for with the serious Matt. Their plans to hit the slopes together the next morning come to a crashing halt when Abby and Matt see paramedics crowding around the main lift with a stretcher. A skier has been found dead on a run, and the circumstances look suspicious. Abby is ready to pack their bags, but Matt and Rich reassure her that ski accidents happen at resorts every year. 1 death could be an accident, sure, but 2, then 3 indicates a pattern. As more victims are found across the resort, Abby wants nothing more than to check out and forget they ever came to the Grand Alpenglow. Then a blizzard traps her under the same roof as the killer, leaving her no choice but to find them before she becomes the next target. But when Abby discovers a shocking connection between the 3 victims, the couple they've come to know, and her new husband, she'll be forced to decide if saving her marriage is worth risking her life. All Downhill shares the tense interpersonal dynamics and atmospheric setting of The Guest List by Lucy Foley and the locked room mystery style of Glass Onion. I've taken 2 fiction intensives through Gotham Writers Workshop, where I refined this novel. An avid skier, I live near Denver and work as a pediatric nurse. Thank you for your time and consideration. Sincerely, Name. This query letter checks all the boxes and includes all 7 essential components of a strong query letter. It begins with a strong personalization, mentioning a specific client the agent has represented, and includes all the necessary details in the snapshot. The description follows the 3-paragraph structure, first introducing the protagonist and their circumstances, followed by an explanation of the inciting incident in the 2nd paragraph, and a tease of the main conflict in the 3rd paragraph. The comparable titles section includes a recently published adult thriller, The Guest List by Lucy Foley, along with Knives Out. The author bio leads with the author's strong writing credentials and includes a reference to where they live and what they do for work without any additional extraneous information. In total, this query letter comes out to 353 words, which is perfectly within industry standards. I've linked this query letter example in the description below, so make sure to download it and use it as a template for yours. But a common mistake I see authors make when querying is writing the query letter once, then sending it off to every agent they possibly can and never revisiting or revising it. Instead, it's a better strategy to send out your queries in batches of 10 to 15 at a time so you have the opportunity to iterate on your query letter. This way, you can swap in a better comp title that you find, or play with your description language if you want to, and see which version of your query letter gets you more positive responses. The last querying tip I'll leave you with is also my biggest one. I cannot overestimate the value of getting a fresh set of eyes on your query letter, and on your manuscript for that matter, to spot things that you may have overlooked and ensure that your book sounds irresistible to read. I offer query reviews and editorial services, so check out my website in the description below if you're interested in getting feedback. I talk a lot about querying and traditional publishing on this channel, so make sure to subscribe if you are hoping to get published. And also let me know in the comments if you changed anything in your current query letter based on this course. Thanks so much for watching, and happy querying.